Today I'm going to review a board game called Torpedo Run. This is one of the coolest board games I've ever seen in my life. I say that because it's this big giant board game where you have these ships that do battle against each other. It's like sea battles. You actually have these little pucks. Well, I call it a puck because it's roughly shaped like a puck, but it's really called ammo chip that you shoot towards the opponent's ships, and when you hit it just right, it makes part of the ship pop off. And then you win by, disabling all the opponent's vessels. By disabling, we mean anything that can pop off is popped off. So just like for a kid, this is just one of the coolest games you could ever have, I think. First, let's take a look at the history before we get into the details, how the game works, how the game is played, and whatnot. Released in 1986, that's by Milton Bradley. That's probably why I was surprised to see this in the thrift store, because I thought, well, I've never heard of this game. Well, heck, in 1986, I was already a grown-up, so no wonder I never saw it or never remember it. But 1986 is an interesting time for them to release a board game like this, because at that time, you had video game consoles were already, just going crazy. You had Nintendo, Atari, Sega, a few others, and, a lot of kids had those. And, even though those were a little bit crude compared to today's video games, it was way better than any kind of a board game. The nice thing about Torpedo Run is that it was just a big, impressive game. And the thing that's so cool about it is that you get to shoot at your opponent's ships. And when you hit the ships the right way, they sort of blow up, or there's a simulated blow up. It's also, very importantly, part of their Floor Wars series, but it's really hard to find out information about this. I guess you'd probably have to call Milton Bradley and ask him directly or something, but there's Torpedo Run. Some people mention Carrier Strike as being another of their Floor Wars series. And there's this other game about catapults, like crossbows and catapults, I think it's called. And that some people think that's part of the Floor Wars series. It's an interesting game. It's, there's a lot of people that talk about the submarines failing. You'll find out later on in this video, I talk about just the rubber bands failing because they get dried out, then they break. And there's some issues with that because it's hard to replace them. Otherwise, I talk about how later on in the video, I talk about how it could be a much cooler game if you were to repurpose the little ships and the parts and just make up your own rules and move off the playing board, which is a big board. But if you moved off the playing board onto a flat surface like a floor, you could come up with a really cool game. I note that like board game geeks, they always get a lot of stuff right. The one thing they do get wrong, though, is they're talking about maneuvering the ships around the board. There's 3 different versions of the game, but only one of the games do you actually maneuver any ships. Otherwise, you get them set, and then you fire at them. Let's review what comes with it. First of all, there is the game board, which, as you can see, it's really big. Not only is it in a big box, but then it folds into 3 sections, so it's a nice big playing board. You also get a couple of battleships. Well, actually, each opponent, each side gets a battleship, so it comes with two submarines, one each. Now, the submarine is the only thing that can shoot those little pucks. The other ships don't shoot at each other. You get 6 cruisers, 3 per side, and those are sort of, to help protect the battleship. Then you get 36 of the ammo chips and labels, instructions, and then, of course, the very important rubber bands. This board is used. It's a little bit beat up, not too terrible. It's got the sort of the standard tape on it to hold it together. Couple of creases and wrinkles around the edges, but overall it's a decent shape. Let's take a quick look at the submarines. They're also called shooters. And as you can see, there's kind of like a part in the top where you can drop the little pucks down into. It's kind of cleverly disguised. Normally there's I think they call it a comm tower. The other thing you'll notice, it does have some stickers on it. This thing, when it's due, comes with stickers to put on the sides of the ships and the submarines and whatnot. But you also notice here that you've got this little lever behind that little tower that you can pull back and release. And when we flip over the submarine, you see there's a little bit of a rubber band in there. And that rubber band is what gives it the tension to shoot out the little puck. Furthermore, if we look at the profile of the submarine, you can kind of see how there's a little gap in the front where that puck can shoot out the front of the submarine. So it kind of comes down on that con tower, and then when you pull back the lever and release, bam, there goes your puck flying across the board. Well, I am fortunate in that I did get some of the rubber bands, but they're also kind of old, some of them dried out. But the good news is that if you've got at least one of the old rubber bands, you can get a pretty good idea the size and type of rubber band that might work for you. So I went out and got a pack of rubber bands. Well, I just tried to find a rubber band that was about the same thickness. I tied it off in the middle, experimented a little bit, and I just made a few of my own and actually used them, and they worked just fine. Now let's take a look at the cruisers. The cruisers only have one target. It is just a simple piece of superstructure sort of in the middle. And then, of course, underneath that, you've got the rubber band. Now, you will notice on the cruisers that the opening to hit it is only on one side. And that's how all of the vessels are made. Each cruiser has got one opening, therefore one target, but the Battleship has actually got 5 openings. The other thing that's kind of hard to see is that on this piece that you stick down in there, of course, it pushes down on the rubber band. Next, we have the Battleship, and the Battleship has 3 gun turrets, 2 fore, 1 aft. In the middle, it has 2 sets of superstructure. Once again, I am missing a lot of parts for this. I hope someday to find another game that, maybe it's a game that I can buy cheap because it's missing some of the parts, then I can put them together, Okay, so I somehow managed to replace all 5 rubber bands in this gray Battleship. If you look at the instructions, you can see that the top deck here of the Battleship is a separate piece from the hull, and when you initially get this, you're supposed to put the rubber bands on before you put the deck down, and then it snaps down, the deck snaps down in the front and the back. They call that fore and aft on a ship. And the problem is I thought, well, I could maybe take the top off, but it is so tight in those little clips that are holding it down. It looks like it's maybe just held in just by pressure, not by any sort of any kind of a clip or ridge that's holding it in place. But it's held in place so tight that I was just afraid that I was going to break the deck of the ship because it was just flexing so much. So now the only way to get those rubber bands in is a way they were never meant to be put in, which is from underneath. I don't know if you can tell on the video, but it's dark as hell down there. There's little tabs that you're supposed to wrap the rubber band around. I actually managed to keep one of the old rubber bands in there because it's still got some flexibility to it. It works. But even like in the middle here, the rubber bands share a tab in the middle. So, I mean, what a pain in the butt that was. But I managed to get it done. Actually, on the last 2, I actually started it by putting the rubber band down through the top, and that made it easier to hook around the one side. And then anyhow, I managed to get that done. It was a virtual miracle. I would say that's a shortcoming of this design because the rubber bands are going to wear out over time. and it just doesn't look like there's a safe way to remove that deck. Before we get into the different game rules, and there's different games, I think there's 3 different games here, but let's talk about this board a little bit more. Basically, as you can see, there's, it's kind of shaped like a football field. What looks like an end zone is actually the shooting zone. What that really is, what it amounts to, is the end zone is the shooting zone. So, of course, it would be kind of unfair if you could put your submarine right in front of a boat and shoot at it. So you got to shoot at your opponent's boat from your end zone, so to speak, all the way across the board. But there in the middle, where you would normally see the 50-yard line in a football field, that's sort of the dividing line between your side and the opponent's side. And so the object of game 1 is to knock out all the targets on the opponent's ships. And the first one to knock all those targets out wins the game. You pick a team, a color rather, gray or tan. You load up all your targets. You load up your submarine with the firing pucks. And then you place, your playing pieces wherever you want to place them. That is on your side of the board. Now, even though the picture shows the battleships back in the shooting zone, so in other words, I would put my battleship all the way in the back in the shooting zone. It almost makes it look like you're supposed to, but there's no rule that says you have to put it anywhere other than you can put your ships only on your half of the board. So once your ships are set in place, they don't move, but your submarine can move anywhere in the shooting zone. And here's the weird thing about this game. Once everything is set, the way the game starts is either one of the players just randomly calls out, ready, aim, fire, and then you just start firing away. And so, kind of an interesting way to do it. Of course, your submarine will eventually run out of pucks. And then so, part of the game is you have to just kind of scramble and grab for those pucks. I can see that creating some chaos because while you're grabbing for the pucks, you're probably going to be, bumping your ships or bumping the opponent's ships. You can play this as a 4-player team. So there's like 2 teams of 2, and basically one is a shooter and the other is the runner that grabs the ammo, so that there's like a constant supply of ammo for you because there's always somebody grabbing the pucks that miss. Of course, that could create some chaos because, you've got somebody's fingers there in the way grabbing ammo. Now, in game number 2, which is called Out of Range Game, the Out of Range Game, the battleships must be placed in this particular area, as you can see by the diagram. The cruisers cannot be placed one in front of the other. They all have to occupy different rows and different columns. And so the thing that's interesting about this game is that once you divide the ammo, 14 apiece, and somebody still yells, ready, aim, fire, you start firing away, but you cannot collect the chips until all 14 have been fired, but then ceasefire is called. And at that point, you do a reevaluation of all the ships and what condition they're in. If a ship is completely disabled, in other words, the targets are gone. Remember, the battleships got 5 targets, the cruisers only have 1 each. But once that's done, then that ship is derelict and it stays in place. But during the ceasefire, you can move any ship that's not disabled, you can move in a kind of an east-west direction along that row that it occupies currently. And so once you get repositioned and you get your submarines loaded, then you just repeat. And of course, you keep going until somebody's ships are completely disabled, and then that person loses the game. I suppose the best way to say that is that once your entire fleet is disabled, then you lose the game. Now, this does say you can also play a 4-player game where the 2 extra players are, again, the ammo collectors, but it doesn't really say how to deal with that, because the whole difference with the second game is that once you're done with your ammo, you call ceasefire. Why do you need a guy to collect the 14 chips if once they're gone, you call ceasefire? So I don't understand why they said that it's okay to have, 4 players. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And now here for the third game is called the Target Practice Game. And it's still 2 people that play each other, but really what you're trying to do is see how good you are at hitting targets. And so it's pretty simple. Just You divide the chips. Each player's got 14. You play till you're out of chips. Just one at a time, though. You take turns playing, or you take turns shooting, rather. And then whenever you're done, you just count up, how many targets each person hit, and whoever hit the most targets wins. Here at the end of the instructions, it talks about replacing rubber bands. And they do say that you should be able to take the deck off. But again, that to me, it looked like a very challenging task and one that may have resulted in breaking the deck. So that is pretty much it. It's one of these games that when I look at it, I think that is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. But it's the way they've set it up with this game board, which is a big game board, but it's kind of small for this type of action. The thing is, I can imagine playing this game and having a lot of fun with it by making up your own rules. And the whole idea would be, number one, if you had a spare room in the house, or let's say a good flat part of the basement that's already pretty much empty, to just clear out a big corner, like a 10 by 10 or a 20 by 20 corner. And just think about that, nice flat concrete, wide open area. Then just, there's all kinds of rules you could make up. You could introduce dice into the equation, and you could say that each time you roll the dice, you get to move around, and then you have another system for, when you shoot. Instead of it being this free-for-all kind of shooting, it's like more strategically moving vessels around and then firing. You could even do a thing where, your submarine it stays off to the side, and it only appears when it's time to fire, but there's a way to determine how you could do that, right? Again, maybe with spinning a wheel, a little pointer spinner, or maybe rolling the dice. You could figure out, one roll of the dice is, how many feet away you have to be. And then another roll of the dice is, what angle you are allowed to attack from. And so, I could just imagine all kinds of rules that I could make up to make this game like really super fun if you had a really big, like I said, a 10 by 10 or bigger flat area. You could just do some really cool stuff with this game. But nevertheless, it's a cool concept, and hopefully one of these days I'll find another game that's, maybe get one cheap because it's missing half the parts, and I can put the two of them together and have one good, nice game and actually play it.